Don't close your eyes. Caleb Morgan shouted as he pressed both trembling hands against the young woman's blood-soaked coat. Snow swirled violently around them, swallowing the world in white. Her breathing came in weak, broken gasps while 4 terrified children huddled beneath the shattered remains of an overturned wagon. A little girl, no older than 8, clutched a rusty kitchen knife with both hands. She pointed it at Caleb, though her hands shook so badly she could barely hold it. "Stay away from my mama," she cried. Caleb ignored the knife. His attention stayed on the woman whose pulse faded beneath his fingertips. Then he heard it. Horse hooves. Not one horse. Several. The killers were coming back. Caleb slowly looked toward the endless white horizon where dark figures appeared through the blizzard. His heart sank. There wasn't enough time. He had 1 rifle. For frightened children. 1 dying mother. And nowhere to run. Colorado Territory, winter of 1879. 3 days earlier, Caleb Morgan had sworn he would never stop for another stranger. He had repeated those words every morning for nearly 4 years. Keep riding. Never get involved. Never care. Because caring was how people got buried. The wind screamed across the frozen valley as his old horse, Ranger, struggled through waist-deep snow. Caleb pulled his heavy coat tighter around himself, but nothing could keep out the cold that lived inside him. People in frontier towns called him a blacksmith. Years ago they had called him something very different. Doctor. A title he no longer deserved. He still carried his old medical bag, though he had not opened it in years. Dust covered the leather. Rust touched the metal clasps. Inside were instruments that reminded him of the family he had failed. His wife. His little son. Both taken by disease despite every ounce of knowledge he possessed. Since then, he fixed horseshoes instead of broken bones. Repaired wagons instead of broken people. Machines didn't die in your arms. People did. Ranger suddenly stopped. The horse refused to move another step. Caleb frowned. What is it, boy? The horse lifted his head, ears pointed toward the forest. At first Caleb heard nothing. Only wind. Then, a faint cry. A child. His jaw tightened. No. He pulled the reins. We keep moving. The crying came again. Louder this time. Filled with pure terror. He squeezed his eyes shut. Don't stop. Not again. Someone else will find them. Except, out here. No one ever did. Caleb cursed under his breath and turned Ranger toward the sound. He found the wagon half buried beneath snow at the bottom of a steep hill. Broken wheels. Dead horses. Blood everywhere. The attack had happened recently. Boot prints surrounded the wagon. At least 6 men. Professional. Caleb's hand instinctively rested on the revolver hanging from his belt. He moved carefully. Every instinct told him the killers could still be nearby. A groan reached him. Someone was alive. He climbed over the shattered wagon and froze. A young woman lay trapped beneath part of the broken frame. Her face was pale from blood loss. Her coat had been ripped where a bullet grazed her shoulder. She looked barely conscious. 4 children crouched beside her. The oldest, a girl around 11, held a hunting rifle almost as tall as herself. She aimed directly at Caleb. "One more step and I'll shoot." Her voice cracked, but her eyes never blinked. Caleb slowly raised both hands. "I'm not your enemy." That's what the last man said. "I know." Silence. Snow collected on everyone's shoulders. Finally Caleb spoke again. "If I wanted to hurt you." He nodded toward the rifle. "You'd never have had time to point that thing." The girl's arms slowly lowered. "Only slightly. My name is Caleb." No answer. "And yours?" She stared for another long moment. "Emily." She nodded toward the others. "This is Noah, Lily, and Jacob." The smallest boy couldn't have been older than 4. He clung to his mother's hand without making a sound. Shock had stolen even his tears. Caleb crouched beside the injured woman. The bullet had passed cleanly through the shoulder. But survivable. Unless the cold killed her first. He checked her pulse. "Wait. My children." Caleb nodded. "They're safe." Her lips trembled. "They came. They killed my husband. They're coming back." Before Caleb could answer, Emily suddenly looked toward the hill. Her face turned white. "Horses." Caleb stood instantly. The sound reached him seconds later. Several riders. Closing fast. Emily grabbed the younger children. "What do we do?" Caleb looked around. No cover. No shelter. No chance of winning a gunfight in the open. Then he spotted something hidden beneath heavy snow. An abandoned logging trail disappearing into the forest. He made the decision immediately. Everyone move. Emily didn't hesitate. She trusted him before she even realized she had. Caleb carefully lifted the injured woman into his arms. Pain shot through her body. She bit her lip to stop herself from screaming. The children followed as Caleb led them through the trees. Behind them, the riders reached the destroyed wagon. Angry voices echoed through the storm. They're gone. Tracks. They can't be far. Caleb's heartbeat thundered. He forced himself not to run. Running left obvious tracks. Instead he moved carefully through rocky ground where snow covered less of the earth. Every decision mattered. Every footprint could become a death sentence. Nearly an hour later, they found it. A forgotten ranger cabin hidden between enormous pine trees. The roof sagged. One window was broken. But the wall still stood. Caleb kicked the frozen door open. Cold air rushed inside. The fireplace still existed. Old firewood remained stacked in one corner. Hope. Real hope. Emily immediately helped her younger siblings inside. Caleb laid their mother beside the fireplace before chopping wood with desperate speed. Minutes later, flames finally burst to life. Warmth slowly returned. The youngest boy began crying for the first time. His sister hugged him tightly. Caleb finally allowed himself one deep breath. Then he looked at the woman. Her condition had worsened. Her skin burned with fever. Her pulse weakened. Emily noticed his expression. She's dying, isn't she? Caleb remained silent. Silence answered the question better than words ever could. The girl swallowed hard. I heard Papa say once, that doctors can save anyone. Caleb stared into the fire. No. His voice was barely above a whisper. They can't. Emily walked closer. You are a doctor. Were. What's the difference? The difference. His eyes filled with memories he had spent years trying to bury. Is that a real doctor saves his family. The cabin became completely silent. Even the fire seemed quieter. Emily slowly reached toward the dusty leather medical bag lying beside his saddle. She picked it up carefully. The old initials still remained carved into the flap. See him. She held it out. My mama doesn't need the man who's hiding. Her voice shook. She needs the doctor. Caleb looked at the bag. His hands refused to move. He hadn't opened it since the day he buried his wife and son. Opening it meant remembering. Remembering meant hurting. But across the room, the injured woman suddenly gasped in pain. Her breathing became shallow. The youngest children began crying again. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Please. Don't let us lose her too. Caleb slowly closed his eyes. For years, he had been running from the man he used to be. Now, 5 frightened souls were asking him to become that man again. His trembling fingers reached toward the old leather bag. The rusty clasps clicked open. For the first time in 4 long years, Dr. Caleb Morgan returned. The cabin fell silent. Only the crackling fire and the raging blizzard outside could be heard. Caleb stared at the instruments resting inside the weathered medical bag. His hands trembled. For years ago those same hands had fought desperately to save his wife and little boy. For years ago, they had failed. He closed the bag. No. He whispered. I can't. Emily stepped closer. You can. I already failed the people I loved most. Emily's voice remained steady despite the tears running down her cheeks. My father used to say courage isn't when you're sure you'll win. She swallowed. It's when you're terrified, but you try anyway. Caleb looked at the frightened children gathered beside the fire. Noah silently hugged his little brother. Lily covered the youngest child with her own blanket. None of them cried anymore. They had already cried too much. Caleb slowly opened the medical bag again. He took a deep breath. I'm going to need hot water. Emily immediately grabbed an old kettle. I'll boil it. Clean cloth. I'll find some. More firewood. Noah nodded and hurried toward the woodpile. Without realizing it, the frightened children had become his assistants. The woman's fever continued rising. Caleb carefully cleaned the wound in her shoulder before stitching the torn flesh. She never screamed. She simply clenched her fists and endured every painful moment. Finally her breathing became steadier. She opened her eyes. You saved me? Caleb gently shook his head. Not yet. You still have a long fight ahead. She managed a weak smile. My name is Sarah. I'm Caleb. I know. Emily smiled through her tears. I told Mama you came back. Sarah looked at Caleb carefully. You almost kept riding, didn't you? Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. Sarah understood. Thank you for turning around. Those simple words hurt more than any bullet ever could. Morning arrived beneath a gray sky. The storm had weakened. Caleb stepped outside. Fresh tracks surrounded the cabin. His blood froze. Someone had been watching them. He knelt beside the footprints. 6 riders. Maybe 7. Recent. Very recent. They knew exactly where the family was hiding. He rushed back inside. We leave immediately. Emily looked toward her injured mother. She can't travel. If we stay. Caleb looked at the tracks once more. We won't survive the day. Within minutes everyone was ready. Caleb repaired an old sled lying behind the cabin. Sarah rested carefully beneath thick blankets while the children walked beside it. The journey through the forest was painfully slow. Every mile felt impossible. By late afternoon they reached a frozen river. Caleb suddenly raised his hand. Stop. The forest had become strangely quiet. Too quiet. No birds. No wind. Nothing. Then, a gunshot shattered the silence. The bullet struck a tree inches from Caleb's head. Down? The children dropped instantly. Bandits burst from the trees on both sides. 7 armed men. The leader smiled beneath a black beard. Told you we'd find them. Emily grabbed the younger children and dragged them behind a fallen log. Caleb fired first. One outlaw fell from his horse. Another disappeared behind a rock. Bullets ripped through the snow. The children screamed. Sarah tried to stand despite her injury. Stay down. Caleb shouted. Another bullet tore through his coat. He barely felt it. His only thought was keeping the children alive. The bandits began moving closer. They wanted prisoners, not bodies. That gave Caleb one advantage. He noticed the frozen river beside them. Its surface had begun cracking beneath the horses. An idea flashed through his mind. Emily. She looked up. When I yell? Run across the river. Her eyes widened. It isn't safe. I know. But it's safer than staying here. The outlaws advanced. 20 yards. 15. 10. Caleb suddenly fired into the thick ice instead of at the men. The first bullet cracked it. The second shattered a larger section. The leader laughed. Missed, old man? Caleb smiled for the first time in years. No. I didn't. The ice exploded beneath 3 charging horses. Animals and riders plunged into the freezing water. Panic spread instantly. The remaining horses reared violently. Now. Emily grabbed the children. They sprinted across the narrow section Caleb had already tested moments earlier. Caleb covered them with steady rifle fire. Another outlaw fell. The others hesitated. That single moment saved every life. By the time the surviving bandits found another crossing, the family had disappeared into the forest. Hours later, lights appeared in the distance. A town. Ash Creek. For the first time in days, the children smiled. People rushed toward them. Doctors carried Sarah to the clinic. Sheriff Dawson listened carefully as Caleb described the attack. Within an hour, a posse of armed deputies rode into the mountains searching for the remaining gang. Several days later the news returned. Every outlaw had been captured. Their leader would never hurt another family again. The blacksmith shop preparing his horse. Emily walked toward him. You're leaving? I always leave. Why? He looked toward the mountains. It's easier. Emily folded her arms. No. It's lonelier. He looked at her. She smiled. Mama says some people spend years searching for home. Without realizing home is searching for them too. Caleb didn't know what to say. At that moment Sarah stepped outside. The youngest boy ran into Caleb's arms. Don't go. Caleb froze. The child wrapped both arms around his waist exactly the way his own little son used to. Something inside him finally broke. Not from grief. From healing. Sarah smiled softly. We have an empty room. The blacksmith retired last winter. The town needs someone. Emily added with a grin. And our family could use one too. Caleb looked around. The children were smiling. The townspeople nodded respectfully. For the first time in 4 years. He wasn't looking at strangers. He was looking at people waiting for him to stay. He slowly untied his horse. Then he walked back toward the family. "I suppose," he said with a small smile, "this horse could use a longer rest." The children cheered. The youngest boy grabbed his hand. Sarah's eyes filled with quiet tears. Months later, the old blacksmith shop echoed with the sound of hammers instead of silence. Caleb repaired wagons during the day. At night, he treated injured ranchers, sick children, and anyone who needed a doctor. He never charged those who couldn't afford it. People traveled from neighboring towns because they trusted the quiet man who had once lost everything. On the wall above his workbench hung the old medical bag, not as a reminder of failure, but as proof that even the deepest wounds could heal. Because sometimes, the road you spend years trying to escape is the very road that leads you home. The end.